Hey, welcome back. Today we're looking at Travelers, episode 15 of season 5. Debuting March 29th, 1998, Travelers takes us a bit back in time as Mulder is investigating the death of a man who disappeared in 1952, but now without the help of a retired FBI agent who looks awfully familiar. We begin with a cop and a landlord who are trying to evict someone, but seeing as how this is the X-Files, I'm gonna guess the tenant is a cryptid of some kind. Ooh, maybe it's a skunk ape. Or just some old man. Quick, pull your gun! You know, if the place is this bad, I'd probably just let him keep it. So he's making human jerky. I don't see what the issue is. The cop is attacked by the old man, but nothing a few rounds from his firearm can't solve. Mulder has the weirdest friends. You can tell this is a younger Mulder because he has that same silly haircut he did in The Unusual Suspects.
Arthur Dales?
No, that's Carl Kolchak. Mulder's come to question former FBI agent Arthur Dales about a man he opened a case on in 1952, that being the old man we just saw in the beginning named Edward Skur. But it's not so much the case that Mulder's interested in, it's the fact the man was calling out for someone named Mulder. Fox Mulder has only really begun to dig into the X-Files, so the only other Mulder it could possibly be would be his father. Why would his father be involved with some old man who keeps dried up husks in his bathtub? It's not like Bill has some sketchy past that his son will uncover one day. Arthur Dales closes the door in Mulder's face because he really is too old for this shit. Oh, so this Edward Skur was a dirty commie. Well, that's all I needed to know, that he was pure evil. Apparently Mulder's father is as well, or he just happened to be at the McCarthy hearings because he enjoys watching paranoia-fueled witch hunts. You know, Bill, you could just golf like most dads. Mulder decides to pay Arthur Dales another visit, because apparently bothering the old recluse once wasn't enough. Once again, Arthur doesn't exactly want to help, but Mulder convinces him by threatening him with a subpoena, which is so Mulder. This Edward Skur is a fascinating fellow. Fascinating in the sense that he somehow manages to remove his victim's organs and soft tissue without ever having to cut into them, which makes absolutely no sense. What also doesn't make sense is Mulder is smoking? Since when does Mulder smoke? And look at the way he's dressed. I don't know if the writers are trying to suggest something about Mulder, but it sure seems that way. We then go back to 1952 as a younger Arthur Dales is looking into these communist allegations that were directed towards Edward Skur.
I'm a family man, for God's sake.
Well, you should have thought of that before you decided to betray your country, Red.
You tell him, Mustache. Oh, it's a good thing he was carrying his I'm a communist card. Nothing caps off a day of busting commies quite like a little bourbon. Arthur receives a phone call at the bar, and I don't know why, but I kinda like how the bartender has to literally hand him the entire phone.
I thought maybe you heard about Skur.
What about him?
He's dead. He hung himself in his cell. The guards found him about 20 minutes ago.
Oh yes, Skur definitely took his own life, and the guards definitely found him that way. Wink. Arthur seems to be having some regrets with this whole communist witch hunt that he's involved with, especially since he did take a father away from his kids, and now he has to tell the wife that her husband just took his own life. But that's weird, isn't that Edward Skur right there? Generally speaking, dead men don't go for late night walks. Arthur gives chase to Skur and the two men get into a little tussle.
Who's down there?
Thankfully, a neighbor scares Skur away before whatever the hell that is can happen. The following day, Arthur's acting kinda normal, almost as if he just didn't see a spider come out of a dead man's mouth. His partner, Mr. Mustache, comes in with something Arthur will find interesting. It's the photos of Skur, a very dead Skur, though it doesn't look like he hung himself. Mr. Mustache is getting a little confrontational with his partner, and I think he's beginning to suspect him of something. Maybe he thinks Arthur's a dirty commie too. Although he does mention that Arthur had been drinking, but I don't know. You'd have to be really drunk to think a dead man is still walking around and that spiders are coming out of his mouth. Arthur gets a phone call from the Justice Department because his report about dead people still being alive doesn't quite add up. Arthur meets with Roy Cohn, who I guess was instrumental in the McCarthy hearings, though I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know anything about the McCarthy hearings.
We've spoken to Mrs. Skur and the neighbors. You seem to be the only person who can identify that man as Edward Skur.
Roy Cohn heavily implies that Arthur remove any mention of seeing Skur last night because of reasons. He does it, but it's gotta be a pain in the ass to have to redo these things with a typewriter. You can't just go back and change one thing, you've gotta retype the entire report. A secretary hands Arthur a file on Skur that is nearly completely redacted. But what's the point of keeping a file when it's 95% crossed out? And if you're the type to redact information, then why should I believe you on anything? Arthur and Mr. Mustache make their way to a homicide investigation, but it's very weird. Why would they leave the music on and the front door open if the police had already been there?
What's that? You smell that?
Yeah, kinda. Listen. You smell something?
I don't know how they didn't smell this the moment they walked in that house. Police roll in, but where the hell were they hiding? Arthur just happens to find a coaster to a bar, I think, which tells him to come alone. Arthur makes his way to the bar, though I don't know too many bars that have confessionals. Oh, pray for me, Father, for I'm about to get shit-faced.
Scar?
No. But I came here to warn you about it.
Baby-faced Mulder warns Arthur about Skur, but in the meantime, Mr. Mustache arrives home with some groceries, and by groceries, I mean beer. According to Bill, Skur isn't a dirty commie. He's a patriot who's had something very weird done to him. He's been turned into something and now has been labeled a communist. His death was also faked as a means of covering up what was done. But what I love about this scene is how vague Bill is with what's really going on. He's basically like Deep Throat or X, where they'll give little crumbs of information but never tell you directly what's going on.
Myrtle.
Why is he giving the cat hell? The bottle wasn't even open. Skur is basically after everyone that labeled him a commie and turned him into a man spider, a human spider thing. I don't know, there's gotta be a better name for it. But this revenge also means Arthur and his partner. Arthur realizes that Mr. Mustache might be in trouble, so he uses the phone to give him a call. But look at that, someone's cut the phone line. This is definitely one of the grossest things to appear on the X-Files so far. Well, Mr. Mustache is dead, but what about his cat? Roy Cohn walks in and is all, "Where the hell do you think you're taking that body? It was gonna be autopsied, but we can't give up any of those government secrets now, can we?" Arthur wants to know what happened to his partner, but Roy basically just tells him to play ball or he'll label him a communist. Arthur does as he's told, but he's not about to let his partner's murderer get away that easily, especially considering his partner was one of the fabulous Freebirds. Arthur figures the only way he'll find Skur is if he knows what was done to him, so he starts looking into the other men that were also claimed to be communists.
I recognize one of these names. It's in an X-file.
X-file?
Yes, unsolved cases. I file them under X.
Why don't you file them under U for unsolved?
That's what I did until I ran out of room.
I love how the creation of the X-Files simply came about because they ran out of space under the letter U. Anyways, it turns out the bodies of one of the men who apparently killed themselves is still at the morgue, which gives Arthur an opportunity to check it out. Now, why hasn't this body been taken like Mr. Mustache? Well, this guy wasn't just a lowly FBI agent. He was something of a bigwig, and his family's been throwing a fit preventing the Justice Department from taking it.
I want you to cut this man open.
No, I can't do that. His family will have my head.
Regardless if they'll have his head, they go through with the autopsy anyways, and I have no idea if I can show any of this. They generally don't show a close-up autopsy of a human. Usually it's just Scully slinging around obviously fake organs. Well, that's disturbing, but thank God for color filters. Arthur decides to pay Mrs. Skur a visit after arresting her dead spider husband. He's basically like, "Look, lady, we both know your husband is still alive, and we both know he was turned into a spider monster."
It's called xenotransplantation. It's the grafting of another species into the human body. It's a procedure that Nazi doctors experimented with during the war.
So we've jumped from communists to Nazis. Fantastic. What I want to know is what the hell this other species is. Anyways, Arthur wants to expose what's been going on, and in order to do that, he'll need Edward Skur's help. Before Arthur can do anything, he's stopped by Roy Cohn, who seems to know where he's at all times. What the hell is Bill doing here? Mrs. Skur goes to her not-so-secret bomb shelter in the backyard, which I guess no one decided to check out because, Ed is right there. Don't worry, I'm sure she'll be fine. Arthur is brought in to see the director of the FBI, who's some J. Edgar something. I don't know, he's probably a nobody. He starts rambling on about communists or something, I don't know, I was scrolling through my phone. But he basically says if Arthur wants to save himself, he needs to serve his country, whatever the hell that means. Well, what it means is Arthur's gonna be wired, and when the time is right, they're gonna capture Skur. I have a feeling things might not go how they planned, considering he was shot some 40 years later at the beginning of the episode. Arthur gets the bar all to himself, which is bad news because we all know how this guy likes to drink. Skur shows up to tell Arthur he and his wife are dead because of whatever the hell they put inside of him, and that he's been sent here to kill Arthur. Arthur, using his noggin, handcuffs Skur to the bar. But if the idea was to have this thing kill Arthur and it failed, why don't these guys just kill Arthur themselves? No one's around to see it. Skur's supposed to be a dead communist anyway, so who would believe anything he'd say? Plus, he killed his wife, so they could easily peg both murders on him. Seems like the story really got to Mulder, but since when is he married?
Skur died saying my father's name. Why?
I haven't the faintest idea.
The funniest thing is this is the whole reason why Mulder came to Arthur to begin with. He sat through an entire story about communists and weird spider monsters and didn't get the one answer he was looking for. But as it turns out, Mulder's father was the one who let him go free, hoping that one day maybe the truth would be exposed. Good luck with that one. Travelers is a fine episode. It's obvious the reason why they put this one together was because David and Gillian were off filming the movie, so they needed something to fill the time slot. I would have preferred if they had gone back to the Unsolved Mysteries idea, but a story about the Red Scare and spider monsters works too, I guess. I feel like this whole idea works better if you know the history, but this was never something that was really touched upon growing up in Canada, at least where I was from. But I do like it. It feels a little Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which was 100% inspired by the Red Scare, except this one is a little nastier. The spider creature, or whatever the hell it is kind of disgusting, and I'm also surprised with how much they showed in this one. The autopsy was all up in those guts, when they usually do that sort of thing off to the side. I don't know if anyone has ever seen the 1987 movie The Hidden starring Kyle MacLachlan, but Travelers kind of feels like it was inspired by it. It's about a body-swapping alien that's being tracked down by the FBI, but the body-swapping shown in the film looks exactly like the spider alien attacks in Travelers. I have no idea if the X-Files took inspiration, but to me it's undeniable. My favorite thing about this one is the fact they managed to get Kolchak's Darren McGavin to finally guest star. Chris Carter was a huge fan of the Kolchak movies and television show growing up, so it was always a dream of his to work with McGavin. They'd been trying to get him since as early as season 2 when Chris asked him to play Senator Matheson and then Mulder's father. Both times Chris was turned down, but eventually they did manage to get him to sign on. How exactly is unknown, but apparently when asked about it, all Chris did was smile and shrug. The biggest loss in my opinion when getting McGavin was not having him reprise his role as Kolchak. The idea was thrown around, but it just never came to be. I don't know why, but I'd likely say it has something to do with the ownership of the Kolchak property, and maybe whoever was in possession of it didn't want to do the crossover. If that's the case, then I think they lost out more than anyone, because having the character Kolchak appear in the X-Files could have revitalized interest in that property, and maybe they could have made a bit more money off the Kolchak name. It could also be because McGavin didn't want to play Kolchak anymore, considering he grew tired of the role back in the day when it was still on the air. No matter what the reasoning behind it is, it still kinda sucks, but at least we did get Darren McGavin for a couple episodes. Travelers was written by John Sheban and Frank Spotnitz, as a tribute to their former teacher and screenwriter Howard Dimsdale. Dimsdale was one of many unfortunate Americans accused of sympathizing with, or even working for, the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War. Like many others in Hollywood, he was blacklisted. Unable to find steady work in the US, he wrote in Europe for a time, though he occasionally contributed to Hollywood projects under the pseudonym Arthur Dales, a name that should sound familiar to X-Files fans. Later in life, Dimsdale became a respected teacher at the American Film Institute in Los Angeles, where he would eventually mentor both Spotnitz and Sheban. Howard Dimsdale was a wonderful man, said Sheban, who told incredible stories about that period, which was a part of American history we'd always been interested in. When Spotnitz and Sheban started working on the episode, they weren't just interested in Cold War paranoia. They wanted to give it that classic X-Files twist. We wondered what if the witch hunt was actually a smokescreen to conceal something else, Spotnitz said. And as they got deeper into it, they realized that Agent Dales being forced to arrest someone he knew was innocent wasn't just good drama, it was a perfect metaphor for the McCarthy era. Just like blacklisted writers, Dales is caught in a system that wants him to sell out his principles or ruin his life. You know, fun stuff. Setting the episode in the past also gave them a chance to explore the early days of both Fox Mulder and the X-Files, which is always a good time. Plus it solved a pretty big problem. During the 8-day shoot, both David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson were tied up in Los Angeles doing reshoots for the X-Files movie. So instead of trying to work around their absence, the writers just said, let's go back to the 50s, throw in some trench coats, and let Mulder pop in for 5 minutes with a sweet baby face. Well, Bill Mulder, that is. Although they did give Fox his sweet padded down hair.
Stupid ass haircut.
To keep things authentic, Spotnitz and Sheban brought in a retired FBI agent as a technical advisor. You know, just to make sure the fedoras were the right shape and the paranoia was historically accurate. We hired a retired FBI agent to serve as a technical advisor on the script, Spotnitz said. This was a gentleman who'd been with the Bureau for 20 or 30 years, and he was very offended by our script. Apparently, the idea that J. Edgar Hoover might be involved in a shady government conspiracy was too much for the guy. He still referred to him as Mr. Hoover, like the man was gonna walk in at any moment and give him a performance review. Then he told me that he'd never actually seen our show, but if this is the type of story that you're telling, he told me, I can't imagine that it would be very popular. So yeah, not exactly a fan. But hey, at least one person was shocked by the idea that the government might not always be the good guy. Spoilers, they never are. And speaking of Mulder's brief appearance, internet forums lit up on March 29th when eagle-eyed fans caught two strange details. Mulder was smoking a cigarette and wearing a wedding ring. Naturally, chaos ensued. Just like in Unusual Suspects, these weren't in the script. David Duchovny added them himself, because why not casually drop hints about Mulder's off-screen marriage and possible nicotine addiction with zero context? In classic X-Files style, none of it was ever explained, though theories did swirl that Mulder might actually be cigarette-smoking man's son, which is such an insanely stupid idea that there's no way they'd actually do that. Also, the wedding band thing was really just David trolling fans some more with his recent marriage to Téa Leoni. This episode does sort of bring up a contradiction though, because if he's learning his father was involved with some experimental alien spider cover-up thing in 1990, and him finding out his father was involved in all these alien-human hybrid experiments later on really shouldn't be that shocking. Travelers currently sits at 7.4 on IMDb. I find this episode enjoyable, but nothing amazing, and I think a solid 7 feels about right, maybe 6.5. Up next, we have an interesting one, when the agents meet with a blind woman who can see through the eyes of a serial killer, in the episode Mind's Eye. So what do you think of Travelers? Let me know down in the comments. Anyways, that's all for today. I really hope you're enjoying the channel, and stay spooky!
Before the X-Files were ever opened,
Was my father involved?
The truth might be exposed.
the conspiracy began.
There are secrets that must be kept from the public in order to serve the greater good.
I don't see the connection.
Maybe you're not supposed to.
The X-Files, an all-new episode at 9/8 Central, Fox Sunday.